Greetings and welcome to this edition of
Positronic.
I'm Barry P. Cook. I want to talk to you about the latest episode of Star Trek Prodigy, which has just returned from hiatus with the first new episode of the second half of season 1. And as it starts, we find the crew coming to a stop in space aboard the Protostar and marveling at how far they came so quickly at high warp, which I guess was 9 point something according to the engineer character. The crew then pretty much tells Dal, hey, we want to go to Federation space. We want to, go visit the Federation. But he rejects the idea of that because I guess he feels like, well, they're going to prosecute us for stealing their ship. And why do you want to go somewhere where there are rules? Let's just, go do our thing wherever we want. We're free. We can do whatever we want. And they kind of override him. Anyway, Dal then goes to check in on Gwyn, who is no longer their prisoner, no longer the crew's prisoner. And she thanks him for not leaving her behind. And he says, oh, yeah, well, that was Janeway. She wouldn't let us leave without making sure we got everybody. Speaking of Janeway, it isn't long before we see her, and she takes the crew through different holo programs for some reason, including Andor 4 and
SETI Alpha 5!
presumably before
SETI Alpha 6 exploded.
And
the shock shifted the orbit. SETI Alpha 5! And everything was laid waste.
And then they find the updated
Kobayashi Maru
simulation and run it against Janeway's advice. And it takes place on the Enterprise D, which was very cool. But before we see any of it, we flash back over to Gwyn, who is lamenting to Zero that she no longer has a place, and she feels lost, and she's down. And Zero says she does have a place. They're on the Protostar. We then flash over to before Gwyn was born, 17 years prior, and we're on the mining planet. And we see that the diviner deliberately created Gwyn as like a test tube baby using only his own self so that there would be a replacement for him when he dies, because he's very ill apparently, but has been for 17 years. I don't get that. But anyway, Dal and the engineer character are looking over the roster of Starfleet personnel from history that they can use in the sim, and they debate using Kirk, but they don't because Dal says, no, we already have a captain and it's me. And instead, they end up with Spock, Odo, Uhura, and Crusher. Holy crap! I thought that was great. I did not see that coming, and it was just very cool. They even used the actors' actual voices, of course, in this case, from previous recordings of their characters in various Star Trek episodes, and it was cool, but it didn't work exactly 100%. It was a little clunky. Some of the lines that they chose to use when they had so many to pick from, I don't know why they picked some that were kind of like almost non sequiturs and didn't really fit, but it was just so cool. They did a great job with the animations. Of course, Dal fails a thing about 100 times before asking for a new engineer and kicking out his own engineer. And the engineer that he gets from the program is frickin' Scotty! It's frickin' Scotty, everybody! Very cool. But we flash back outside the sim to Gwyn, who asks Janeway why her dad would have wanted the ship. And Janeway can't tell her because apparently the history of the Protostar is classified and the hologram doesn't have access to it. So Gwyn says she's going to get around that somehow and figure out what the history of the Protostar is. And she's going to, dig through the files and find a way around the classified protection. In the process, she does find a computer file written in her native language, which she says is weird because her and her father are the only two people of their kind left, as far as she knows, and they've never had contact with the Federation. So how could there be this file in their land? It's very strange, she says. Dal ends up transporting with Spock to the attacking Klingon ship's bridge in the simulation. And he and Spock take them down, knock them out, stun them, what have you. But the Enterprise still gets blown up. And Spock explains that Dal can't admit defeat to the crew, but Dal decides that, well, maybe he's going to be a better listener, because all through the thing, he didn't really listen to anything that anybody was telling him, I guess. The simulations of his crew, Spock, Odo, etc., nor his actual engineer. And so he decides that he's going to maybe be a little less headstrong, a little less full of himself, and be a better listener. So he goes to, I guess, the bridge to tell the crew what he's been up to. And when he arrives, he finds that they are further examining this file that they found. And in the process, the engineer character reveals that it was really Dal who made them stay on the planet they were on before until they were able to rescue Gwyn, which she smiles at greatly. Just before it's discovered that a holo recording of the Protostar's previous captain is there, which they play, and the previous captain of the Protostar was Chakotay. So legacy characters are being brought in left and right here, which is cool. And apparently now we're going to have some interaction with Chakotay, which should be cool because he, of course, knew the real Janeway, and this Janeway is just a hologram. And apparently he had his own Janeway hologram as captain of the Protostar, of course, which it would seem the hologram doesn't remember at the moment. So we have to figure out why that is. So it looks like it's going to be an interesting second half of the season. Now, I've been praising this show pretty highly from the beginning. I really liked the first 5 episodes, and this episode was okay. I like the fact that they're, going in a direction where, hey, there's a mystery, and what was up with the Protostar, and why is it so important, and all of that stuff. I love that they're sort of bringing in Chakotay, given that Janeway is a central character in the show as a hologram. So that's, not her actual self, which will make it cool but different at the same time. I like that they're, hinting at the fact that Dal and Gwyn's friendship is going to be a thing, which they've been doing the whole time, but they're still building on that. So that's cool. And of course, it was great to see all the legacy characters, including, by the way, Dr. Crusher, as I said, who was played, it seems, for this episode by Gates McFadden. She's the only one of the people that they brought back who isn't deceased. So her lines, at least, always made sense. She sounded a little different. She sounded kind of older, but it was still cool. But yeah, I think this episode was okay. I liked the holo, deck sequence. I liked that he was being put through the
Kobayashi Maru,
because it's just a cool thing. But I didn't like that some of the dialogue was clunky. Some of the recorded dialogue that they used for the deceased character, the actors who are deceased, didn't quite fit the situation. It seemed out of place, and I think they could have done a better job there. Also, Michael Dorn is still alive, and he was, of course, security chief on the Enterprise D, so why they wouldn't have gone with him, I don't know. Another interesting thing about this holodeck simulation, though, is that they showed the Klingon crew, the crew of the Klingon ships, and they were the Klingons that we're used to from the post-original series era, which is interesting because, of course, they're different on Discovery, which takes place 10 years before the events of the original series. So that was weird by itself. But now they've actually shown regular Klingons on a current Star Trek show that's also supposed to be, canon. So how does that, one of the things that people who, I guess, didn't mind the Klingon change on Discovery would say when you brought it up is they'd say, no, you're supposed to just suspend your disbelief and think of the Klingons as having always looked that way. Well, that was fine up until this episode because they've shown that no, they didn't always look that way. So, within the same continuity, the same overall continuity. So I think that's funny because now the people who are okay with the change can't just say, well, no, you're supposed to pretend they always look that way, because we can't, because they just contradicted it. So that means we need an explanation. Why do they look that way? And it also just makes you wonder, like, what the writers were thinking. Like, they have to know that this is going to be weird, right? Why would they include Klingons? Could have just used the ships, right? And voices and stuff if you wanted. So, yeah, that's kind of weird. One thing I want to note that was really cool too is that they also did use the original audio of from Star Trek II for the part where the crew hears the distress call coming from the
Kobayashi Maru.
That is part of the simulation. So that was really cool too. But yeah, I'm gonna say 3 out of 5 for this episode. Wasn't great, but nothing was really wrong with it except for some of the clunky stuff, and I didn't really think there was much of a point to it. The simulation, like, he comes out going, oh, I guess I have to be a better listener, but I thought that was a weak sort of reason to do what they did. But anyway, that's it. I'll be back with a review of the next episode once it is released. Until then, of course, I wish you peace and long life.